Thank you, Brother Ron, for that good prayer. It's always such an encouragement when you're the one who's about to speak, and it's been done so many times just in the past few days that you've offered prayers for my benefit as the one who will be before you speaking, teaching and preaching, and I so much appreciate that. This morning for the Bible class period, we are going to have a Bible class. And so what I mean by that is that I'm not going to stand here and preach a sermon to you. We'll do that later during the worship period. But what we're going to do now is we're going to study together. We're going to have interaction. So this will be a Bible class format. And I'll be asking questions, and those questions will not just be launched out into the stratosphere. I'll be looking for answers and feedback and discussion as we move through this study for the next few minutes this morning. Matthew chapter 14 is where we're going to primarily focus our attention as we engage in this study. And what we're looking at is the miracle of Jesus walking on the water that's recorded here in this passage. And this is one of those miracles that is recorded not only in Matthew's gospel, but also in Mark and in John. And so it is a significant miracle of Jesus recorded in these gospel accounts. But as we get into this, what we want to do to begin with is just to read through the account, and then we'll back up and we'll break it down and discuss it together as we move through it. So notice with me in Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 22. And we'll read verse 22 down to verse 33. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on a mountain by himself to pray. And when evening had come, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." As we look at what unfolds here, let's just back up and get a little background here. We notice that this takes place in Galilee, where Jesus did so much of his teaching and performed so many miracles. And in particular, we're focused here on the Sea of Galilee. That's where this incident happens. And so that Sea of Galilee, really not much of a sea as we would think of it today, not like the Mediterranean Sea, but really a lake there in the region of Galilee. And this is what it looks like today. And so here's the place that we're reading about here in Matthew chapter 14, where this miracle occurred. Somewhere on this lake, somewhere on this Sea of Galilee is where these events happened. And so we always want to be reminded that when we read these accounts in the Bible, we're reading about real people in real places in ancient times doing real things. This is not some faraway place no one has ever seen or been. You can go there today. You can see the Sea of Galilee and see where these things happened, at least generally speaking. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get into the background of this miracle in the first few verses that we just read, in verses 22 through 24. And let's think about what we've read here and notice what's happening. Anybody tell us what event immediately came before this section? What has just happened prior to this? The feeding of the 5,000, right? Where Jesus multiplied the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish to feed the multitudes. A miracle that's recorded in all 4 gospel accounts. That's what has just happened before this. And so you'll notice in verse 22 that Jesus makes his disciples get in the boat and go away. But why does he do that? Why is he withdrawing himself and his disciples from the multitude at this particular point in time? Why do that right now? Does anybody recall? Now, Matthew doesn't really explain that to us, but we have some clues from the other accounts, and especially in John's Gospel. Does anybody remember in John's Gospel what reaction did the people have when Jesus performed that miracle of feeding the 5,000?
They're ready to crown Jesus king, and he goes to the mountains, it says, and prays.
Okay.
He kind of gets away from everybody.
That's where they want to make him king. This guy is going to feed us? Sign me up for that, right? Let's make him our king. And that's not why Jesus came. He didn't come to be an earthly king. He didn't come to be that kind of king. And so the people wanted to come and make him king, so what does he do? Well, he goes away. That's not what he came for. And so he withdraws himself and his disciples from the multitudes. They're going to cross the lake here. But then, as John just mentioned, in verse 23, now the disciples get in the boat. What does Jesus do? He goes to pray. Okay, so he leaves them, they're in the boat, and he goes away by himself to the mountain to pray. Now you think about that, and this is not, of course, the only place where we see the New Testament talking about Jesus taking time to pray and going various places by himself to pray. It's one of many occasions like that. But think about this. Since Jesus is just as much God as is the Father, why does he spend time in prayer to the Father? Why does he do that? Any thoughts about that? Have you considered that? Here he is, God in the flesh, the Son of God on earth, and he's praying to God the Father while he's on earth. Why is he doing that?
Well, he was tempted to try, just like all men, and these things were probably a temptation, you know, the adoration of the crowds and all the various things going on. Plus, he knew what was coming up ahead of him, and he's, I guess, going like we would to restore himself and get encouragement from God, I would say.
Okay. All right. Good thoughts, right? We know that he was tempted in all points as we are. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15. We know that he faced those pressures. This was his opportunity to get away from the crowds, to communicate with the Father in this way, to strengthen himself in this way. Very good thoughts, Stephen?
Just to have that communion, that fellowship, that connection with the Father, just like we might get together with people, we might get together as spouses, we might get together as brethren, through stressful, difficult times, just to get together and talk about it and to work through it.
Right, very good. That fellowship, that connection, that closeness, and here he is getting away from everyone else so that he can focus on that relationship with the Father. Any other thoughts about why he does this?
He also a demonstration of his dependency as well as his influence, trying to be influential in his acts of prayer.
All right. His example, right? Think about his example. What are we supposed to do? What are we instructed to do? As always is the case, He's our perfect example. And the example that He set for us is, you get away, you get in private, you commune with the Father, you spend time in prayer. That's the example that He set for us. And that's what He does here as well. Get another thought, Steve?
Just on the practical side, He's giving time for the crowd to calm down a
Yeah.
little bit.
Right.
And then to set up what's getting ready to unfold. If He was with them, it wouldn't have been the same.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. Setting up what's to come. And of course, we always have to think about that. Jesus knew everything. He knew what was going to happen. He had a plan. Everything was moving along according to what He had planned and according to the Father's plan. So He is setting things up in what He does. It's a good point.
We're also supposed to pray without ceasing and staying in constant communication with God.
Yeah. Staying in constant communication with the Father. That's what we're supposed to do, and that's what He did, and that's the example that He set for us. Good thoughts. Okay, so as we look at what's going on here, while Jesus is praying, what condition are the apostles in here in verse 24 at this point?
Tossed about in storm.
All right, they're in the boat on the lake, being tossed about in a storm. Now, why does that matter? Why does it matter that it tells us that the wind was contrary and they're being tossed here by the waves? Why is that an important detail here?
It's leading up to displaying their faith, I guess.
All right. It's, again, getting back to the idea of setting the stage, right, for what's going to happen. They're not just having a calm little, crossing of the lake here on this occasion. We need to think about this. They didn't just get in a boat and just calmly, sail across to the other side. We need to recognize what kind of condition they're in at this point. This is not a fun ride across the water. They're being tossed. The wind is against them. Things are getting very bad for them here, right? Now, they can't just fire up the motor and speed on over to the shore. They don't have a motor. They are at the mercy of the wind here in the middle of the lake. And so all of that is very important when we think about what is unfolding here in Matthew chapter 14. All right, so with that background in mind, let's get into now the actual miracle and the performance of this miracle of Jesus. Moving on to this next little section here in verses 25 to 27. What time of the night is it when Jesus begins to go out and walk on the sea here? What does it tell us in verse 25?
More than likely, it would have been between 3 a.m. and 6 p.m., which would have been the fourth watch of the night. The night being broken up into quarters, starting at 6
All right.
p.m.
Okay, and so you said 3 a.m., between 3 a.m. and 6, the fourth watch of the night. Yeah, that's at least 3 a.m. at this point. Okay. And so you think about it, we're not out here in the middle of the day, it's not a nice afternoon, sail across the water here. I mean, what are you normally doing at 3 a.m. for most of us? Hopefully we're asleep, right? And so this is the middle of the dead of night, right? 3 o'clock in the morning or somewhere in that range. And that's the time frame for when this is going on. Okay, so not only is it windy and stormy and the waves are tossing the boat, it's dark. I mean, completely dark at this point. Okay, so that adds to what's happening here on this occasion. Now, when we look at the miracle as it's described at first in verse 25, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. Well, what's so impressive about that?
No man can do that.
You ever tried it? Doesn't work, does it? And so here is something that completely overrides the normal operation of the natural world. And really, that's the definition of what a miracle is. Right? It's not just, oh, something wonderful happened, or that was great, or that's amazing, what a miracle, like people use that term so often today. We're talking about something that completely overrules the laws of physics here. He is walking on top of the water on this lake. That is a miracle. That's impressive. That's a display of God's power. Now, when you look at the reaction to that, here you have the apostles out in the boat. Again, it's dark. The wind and the waves, all of that is against them. How do they initially react to the miracle? In verse 26. Fear. Somebody said fear. Okay. All right.
I think it's a ghost.
All right. They're in fear. They're troubled. They say it's a ghost. Why do they react like that? I mean, we're reading it, and it tells us that Jesus was walking on the sea. Why are they reacting like this?
Simply because it's not a normal, natural occurrence.
Okay.
You see every day.
Yeah. This is not something that they've experienced. Clint?
You got at least 4 fishermen who are used to this.
Yeah.
They're used to being in a boat. Probably, if things didn't work out during the day, they got to go get the catch. So maybe they have been on the water during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And they can recognize when something looks amiss.
Yeah.
This isn't right.
Good point. Right. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, fishermen, fished every day of their lives on this body of water. As Clint mentioned, there were times they said they'd fished all night. They'd been out at this time on the lake before many times. They'd never seen anything like this. Right? This is out of place. This is not something they've experienced before. And when you think about them being troubled here, go ahead, Stephen.
And it's compounded by them being in the midst of this storm.
Yeah.
They're worried at this point.
Yeah.
And so then you got that hyper state of awareness, and then somebody's walking out there. I mean, it'd be enough to see somebody walking out when it's calm
Right.
and relaxed,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's so important that we remember what we've already been told about the circumstances here. This is not an easy situation. This is a stressful situation to begin with, and now you add this into the mix. What's going on here? Right? And as was mentioned there in verse 26, they say it's a ghost. Does that mean there really are ghosts walking around among us from day to day?
No, I think it just, because they knew they were fishermen, so they defied the laws of physics.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's just kind of grasping at straws to try to come up with something. You ever get awakened by some noise at 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the night, some storm, something like that wakes you up, and boy, there have been times that's happened to me, and I'll open my eyes and I think I'm seeing something, somebody's in the room, something's going on, right? And you kind of rub your eyes, and of course you realize a few seconds later, no, I just got disturbed or whatever, I was dreaming. And it's not that that's really happening, but it's just that you're disturbed. Like it says, they're troubled, they're distressed, they're seeing something and they don't understand what it is. And that's kind of the initial reaction. One of those occasions where, the hair stands up on the back of your neck and what's going on here? That's kind of the position that they're in. Now, in verse 27, how does Jesus respond to their fear as he's walking on the water? What does he do? He comforts them, right? That's what he's doing here. And I'm reading from the New King James Version. You may have something a little bit different, but In the New King James there in verse 27, he says, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." He knows their fears. He knows their thought process. And so he is speaking words of comfort to them. Now, as we think about that, why should his words have been a comfort to them?
The storm, the ghost, the stress that you're talking about, it's probably evident on their faces when Jesus sees them, that things aren't going well in the boat.
Okay. He knows things aren't going well in the boat. They need some comfort, some reassurance at this point. What about him saying, "It is I, do not be afraid"? Why is that a comfort?
Well, they had just seen the miracle, plus all the other miracles before that. Feeding 5,000, going all the way back, turning water to wine. They had seen all those things. At this point, they should begin to grasp he can help.
Okay, here's somebody who is powerful, who can help. This is our leader, our master, our Lord, right? And at the same time, what had they just said when they first cried out?
Well, they know that it's not a ghost.
Exactly, right? Got that cleared up, right? So that was the big concern. It's a ghost. We don't know what this is coming toward us here. Okay, well now we know, not only is it not a ghost, but it's the person we trust the most, right? It's the Lord. Okay. Now, let's go on. And Matthew gives us something that the other accounts don't give us, and that is Peter's involvement here in this miracle, in this section in verses 28 through 31. So once Jesus identifies himself here, in verse 28, how does Peter respond?
Command me to walk on the water.
All right. He says, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." Okay, and why is it important that Peter requests that Jesus command him to come to him on the water? Why is that significant? Go ahead.
Because he knew that this person had defied the laws of physics. I mean, in his own way. So he
Yeah.
knew that the only way he could do that is if he was given permission.
Okay. All right.
Of course, he kept doing it until he lied.
All right. We'll get to that in a moment. Yeah. So here's somebody who can do this, who has the power to do this. What is Peter obviously recognizing here about himself?
He doesn't have
He doesn't have that power, right? Again, he's a fisherman. He's been out on the water numerous times. He's been in the water all his life. He knows this doesn't work, right? The only way he's going to be able to do this is if the one who has the power to do it commands him to do it. Do you have a thought, Logan?
Just personally, the idea of stepping out of a boat into a storm is a bad idea.
Right.
Chances are that command was not just asking for the ability to walk on the water, but also to boost Peter's confidence in being able to. Because
Right.
if he had an open invitation, it may not have been something where he would have wanted to step out, but that command gives him the, okay, I need to do this.
Right. Very good. Right. Very good. You think about the faith that it takes to step out of the boat, right? Again, it's the middle of the night, there's a storm, there's all this wind, all these waves are tossing the boat. Yeah, and so Peter needs the courage here that the Lord's going to command him to do this. He's not just going to step out and knowing that he'll sink right to the bottom. And so all of that is important here. Now, how does Jesus respond to Peter's request? As we look at verse 29.
Come.
He says, "Come." Okay, just one word, right? One word from the Lord, "Come." And then, when that word is issued, how does Peter participate in the miracle?
He experiences what Jesus is actually doing.
All right, so now we've got two people who are walking on water. Two people who are experiencing this incredible, unusual event that goes beyond anything in the normal operation of the world. In verse 29, Peter had come down out of the boat. He walked on the water to go to Jesus. What's the difference between Peter and Jesus with respect to the performance of this miracle? They're both walking on water. What's the difference here?
Jesus had the power to do it, and Peter himself did not.
Okay. All right. Jesus had the power to do it. Peter by himself did not. That's a good way to put that, right? The only way Peter is able to do this is because Jesus is there telling him to do it. Peter's ability to walk on the water depends completely on the power of Jesus commanding him to do so. So they're both walking on the water, but there's a huge difference between the two in that respect here. And as we look at verse 30, what happens to Peter as he's walking on the water toward Jesus?
He's overcome by fear.
Overcome by fear. Okay? And the result of that is begins to sink. Begins to sink. All right? Now, he's not in the kiddie pool here. He's not in the shallow end. When it says he's beginning to sink, that's not, well, I'll just, wade out here. I mean, he's in the middle of the lake. This is a deep, deep body of water here. Okay, so this is serious. Now, when you look at what is said there, why does he become afraid? What is it that happens?
They're just boisterous, as it's stated here.
All right, verse 30. He saw that the wind was boisterous. That's what made him afraid. Okay? And he's looking around here and he's seeing how bad the conditions are as he's not in the boat anymore. He's out here walking on the water.
And if we've seen artist depictions of this, we see what they conceive as a snapshot of what's going on. And they're yeah, exactly like that. And what we don't get is Peter walking on the water. Mm-hmm. He's riding the waves up and down. His equilibrium's probably playing with him, and he's feeling that as he's walking out to the Lord. He feels that wind hitting him, splashes of the waves, white caps coming up. He's right in the thick of it. So to see him be distracted, for us, we sometimes look at this, and the Lord rebukes him for his lack of faith, but which one of us would have stepped out and did any different?
Yeah, right. We need to think about that. And like you mentioned earlier, this is not a calm, placid, sea of glass that he's walking out on here. Like you said, there's waves and everything is just stormy and being tossed around. That's what he's walking in the midst of here. Somebody else had a hand up over here. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say that all of those criteria for fear existed before he stepped out of that boat.
Right.
But he left his safe zone.
Yes.
And left the one thing that he felt safety and comfort in. And as Stephen points out, now he's kind of on his own without, that physical thing that's going to keep him alive. And now he's got to trust in something spiritual.
Yeah.
And so it's really, it really throws him off.
Right, it throws him off. He's left the safety of the boat. He's out there walking in the midst of the sea. Yeah, scary situation here for Peter. And so, how does Peter then react in verse 30 when he sees all this going on and he's afraid? What does he do?
Lord, to save.
Cries out, "Lord, save me." Right? That's what he does there in verse 30. That's his response to this frightening change of circumstances where he sees all this scary stuff and starts to sink. "Lord, save me." So, in what two ways does Jesus respond to that cry for help? What's the first thing?
Mercy, he reaches out.
reaches out, right? Yeah, mercifully. Stretches out his hand and caught him. Okay? And so he's not going to sink now. He's not going to go to the bottom of the lake and drown, right? The Lord's got him. And then what's the second way the Lord responds?
Gives him a rebuke.
Gives him a rebuke, right? Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And so what does to what does he attribute Peter's inability to continue walking on the water here? His faith. Why is that important?
Just didn't keep his eyes on the ball.
Okay.
He looked away and then he was overwhelmed.
All right. Didn't keep his eyes on the ball, or didn't keep his eyes on the Lord here. And that's what led to this. Go ahead, Clint.
I think it kind of goes back to what he first told them to comfort them. He says, be of good cheer. You know, that doesn't mean, hey, be happy. That means take heart. Bolster your confidence.
Yeah.
Have courage. And so Peter quite literally and impulsively says, okay, I'm going to take some courage. I'm going to step out of the boat. You know, help me.
Yeah.
But then quickly he loses that cheer. He loses that courage. And he as anyone would, I would think in this situation, just loses sight of what really is happening and who's in control and who has the authority.
Right. Loses sight of who's in control here, right? That's what Jesus is referring to when he talks about him being of little faith. Right? It's easy for us to be hard on Peter here. I mean, he's the one, and it's in his character, as we see, he's the first to jump, right? He's the one who's going to step out of the boat here. You think that takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of faith right there to be willing to step out of the boat in these circumstances. And he did that. But now his faith wavers. He loses that confidence and that courage, and he starts to sink and cries out to the Lord. Jesus takes him by the hand and rebukes him for his little faith here. All right, let's look at the outcome of the miracle then. In the last couple of verses that we read, in verses 32 and 33. So here in verse 32, what happens as soon as Jesus enters the boat with Peter? The wind ceased. Why is that important? What does that tell us?
Jesus had dominion over all.
He had dominion over the whole situation, didn't he? Right? Soon as he gets in the boat, perfect calm. Right? That tells us something about this whole situation.
And John adds that they were immediately where they were going to go.
Yeah, very good. John 6:21.
Everything in an instant is solved.
It's all fine. Immediately, as Stephen mentioned in John's account, not only does the wind calm down, but they're at the land. Trouble's over completely. And so how do the disciples respond to Jesus once he's in the boat? What do? They worshiped him, right? They worshiped him and they said, truly you are the Son of God. What do we learn from Jesus accepting worship from men here? This is not the only time we read about that in the New Testament, but what do we learn from that? That they worshiped him, and Jesus doesn't say, oh no, don't do that. He accepts it every time. What do we learn from that? He's deity. He's God, and only God can accept worship. That's a privilege that belongs to God. And he has that privilege, and he exercises that privilege. And so why do they proclaim, truly you are the Son of God here at the conclusion of this miracle?
Well, first of all, just because to find anything that we can explain. But if you go through the Old Testament and you start looking at all the times that God used water in order to perform miracles, you know, I mean, it even starts in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. It says the Spirit of God moved across the face of the water. And then you have the flood. And then later on, you have, the river that turned to blood. Then you have the splitting of the Red Sea, the splitting of the Jordan. Naaman is told to go and wash so that he may be healed. And then there's other examples. And then you fast forward to where Jesus would turn water into wine, and where he told the blind man to go wash in the pool of Siloam. I mean, everywhere that we look, there's something about water that God chooses to do a lot of miracles through. And this shows his complete and total command over that.
Yeah, good point. Complete and total command over these elements, right? That's what they witness here. Now, in Mark's account, he even adds, they had not understood about the loaves. But at least for the moment, they get it now that they've seen this. Go ahead.
For the disciples, it's seeing is believing. The more they see, the more their faith is built.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, after Jesus has rose, when he talks to Thomas, he says, blessed are those who haven't seen and yet still believe.
Right.
But at this time, they see it. More miracles are being performed, and it builds their faith.
Right. They're being strengthened in what they believe about Jesus. Very true. All right, we've got a few minutes left. Let's think about some applications. Our theme this weekend has been trusting God in troublesome times. So let's try to make some applications from what we've just studied and discussed. What lessons might we learn from the fact that Jesus waited until the disciples were struggling against the wind in the midst of the sea before he came to them? What do we need to learn from that? Brian?
Serving God doesn't mean we get delivered from every struggle immediately. Sometimes we have to struggle through it, and God uses that to help us grow. But he's always there for us too, and he always does deliver if we hold our heart.
All right. The Lord waited for them to experience the trial and the difficulty before he came in and solved the problem. Okay? And so you think about that. Did he love them when they were out here being tossed around in the middle of the sea? Did he just stop loving them for a while when that was going on? No. Okay. He loved them just as much the whole time. But they had to experience being tossed around in the sea before he would come and deliver them and help them. How can we use that in our lives with what we go through today?
A test. We're being tested.
We're going to have
faith.
Yeah.
Which way are we going to go? Are we going to trust and believe, or are we going to go the other way? There's only two ways to go.
We're going to have our faith tested. It's probably, not necessarily going to be out in the middle of a lake somewhere. But you think about the storms and changing winds of our lives, right? The things that go against us, the difficulties, the trials. We don't need to say, well, I guess God doesn't love me. Because look what's happening. No, Jesus loved the disciples, even while they're struggling against the wind here. John?
We can see ourselves in Peter because he has his eyes on Christ, but he gets distracted, and his faith wavers. And that's a good lesson for us, because when the hard times come, as was mentioned, in the trials, whether it's the COVID virus, some other sickness, or a death of a loved one, or maybe a job loss, whatever it is, don't lose sight of what's ahead. We can think about the Apostle Paul sitting in prison, awaiting execution, and he writes Timothy and tells him, God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control.
Yeah.
That's the spirit we're to have. We're not to be scared. We don't lose faith because we're in danger and we think we're going to be without something, or maybe we'll lose our life. We're to stay faithful. We're to only fear God and not fear all these other distractions that are around about us, because that's what happened to Peter.
Yeah.
And that lesson's there for us.
Yeah, you're in spiritual application number 2 here already, right? And that's very good. That's exactly what we want to talk about, right? Peter began to sink, even though at first he's able to walk on the water. What caused that? Well, as John was just talking about, when he looked around, he took his eyes off the Lord, where his confidence was, and started looking at the circumstances. That's what happens to us. As he mentioned, could be all kinds of different things in our lives, right? We stop looking at the Lord and putting our trust in Him. We start looking, well, but look what happened. Look what's going on in my life. Look how circumstances have changed for the worse. Look what's happening to me right now. Start looking at all the wrong things, and that's when we start to sink. We have to keep our eyes on Jesus. That's the lesson from Peter here. He started looking at how the winds were boisterous. That's when the problem came in. Don't look at the winds. Don't look at all the negative things that are happening in life. Don't look at all these people. They don't want to serve the Lord. All these terrible things. Look how immoral our country's becoming. Look at all these people and how they're against everything that Christ stands for. And look at all the terrible things that go on from day to day. And we're looking at all the wrong stuff. Now we need to be aware and we need to be armed against all of that. But when we let that drag us down, oh, maybe we should just give up. Maybe we can't do this anymore. Maybe nobody wants to serve God anymore. We're looking at the wrong things. Keep your eyes on Jesus. That's what Peter needed to do. That's what we need to do. Number 3, what do we learn from this account with respect to the power that Jesus possessed on earth in connection with the laws of nature? We've already talked about this some. What's the lesson there for us?
It's all power.
All power, right? He didn't leave that behind in heaven when He came into this world. He possessed and exercised that power. Stephen?
It specifies the wind ceased, the waves ceased, which even if you...
How does that work?
Yeah, even if the wind was immediately shut off, normally waves would keep going until they calmed down. But both those stopped, plus that boat with all those men got from the midst of the sea over to the shore immediately. He had command over every physical element that was there. And I've wondered, were there other people who happened to be awake and at the edge of the sea, then all of a sudden everything just...
Right.
What are they thinking about? These guys have the inside. They know why it's happening.
What a display.
It had to have that deep impression, which only grew later as to how powerful He really was.
Yes. And let's think about this along with that. Yes, He had all that power to do all of that when He was here. Does He still have that for us today? Is He still in that much control for us today? All right, there's the challenge. There's where it hits home. I can read the miracle. I can see how powerful He was and how much control He had over the situation then. Do I understand that it's the same thing today? That He is just as much in control and in command of things today? That's where we have to place our faith. One more. I know we're just about out of time. What should we learn here from Matthew's account of Jesus and Peter walking on the water concerning faith and doubt? Just to sum up the things that we've been talking about. Clint?
Real quick on Paul's account, when he's about to go through a tremendous amount of stress and events. In Acts 23:11, Jesus tells him the same thing. Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. Mm-hmm. And so you think about Paul's journey to get there. It was fraught with just insurmountable odds, seemingly, to get to Rome. Mm-hmm. And so when the Lord tells him, stands by him, and at this point says, be of good cheer, take heart, have courage. You're going to go through a lot, but you're going to get there.
Right.
Paul needed that. Because he's in the deep for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's that same type of response that we get here from the apostles. That they're supposed to have courage, they're supposed to take heart, they're supposed to bolster their faith because Jesus is with them.
Isn't that the lesson, right? You are going to go through some stuff, but you're going to get there because your trust is in the one who is in control. Steve?
And if we are like Peter and begin to be overcome by those fears because of what's going on around us, if we will just refocus, reach out to the Lord, He's there. He's waiting and ready for us to turn to Him and say, Lord, save me. Lord, help me.
Yeah.
And He's there to respond and get us through.
Yeah. Don't ever forget who is in control.
And so as we go through these things, how do we react? Do we hunker down and stay home and or do we continue to go to services? Do we open up our Bibles to see how faithful men and women reacted to hard times? Does it reinforce our faith, and do we double down on our service to the Lord, or do we shut our faith down and our spiritual life down and kind of pull the covers over our heads and not do the things that we should do? We need to turn to the things that God has given us to get through these hard times.
Yeah. There's the choice, right? There's the choice. What will we do? Like you said, are we just going to give up and just sink like Peter did? Or are we going to keep our eyes on the Lord and focus and know that He will deliver us? It may not be right now. It may not be easy. But He will ultimately deliver us.
I think it was interesting to note that when Peter did start to sink, he didn't turn back to what he knew, and he didn't try to get back to the boat. His immediate response was, Lord, save me. And he never doubted that Jesus was capable, even though he was in the act of sinking.
Right, very good. And again, it's easy for us to jump all over Peter, but put yourself in his position, and that's right. He knew where the source of help was. Lord, save me. And that needs to be where we always turn. That's the one who can help us. Very good. Any last thoughts as we wrap up this morning, our Bible class period? Thank you so much for all the good discussion and contribution to our study this morning. Thank you for taking part as we study these things together. And we'll take a few minutes now to get ready for our worship. Thank you.